Hello there, Scott here. Yes, it's me talking to you. This will be your Risk of Rain 2 Lunar item tier list. Keep in mind that every single lunar item in the list is not bad. It is merely more or less situational. With that said, we can actually begin the tier list. We can begin the tier list, starting off in the C tier, B to fealty. It does absolutely nothing. It is essentially the equivalent of a Dio's best friend. It is a Dio's best friend in the sense it does absolutely nothing until you get to a certain point in the game, which is the Celestial Portal. The Celestial Portal allows you to obliterate yourself, only it doesn't give you 5 coins, it gives you 15, provided you kill the scavenger. This is just a Dio's best friend in that sense, in which it is absolutely useless and does nothing. It is actually somehow more useless than the Corpse Bloom. You could argue it is more useful because it gives you lunar coins, but that's assuming you killed the Twisted Scavenger, and you're not always going to kill the Twisted Scavenger. Corpse Bloom is up next. Corpse Bloom is an easier to get rejuvenation rack. This in it itself is already making it good because it's already easy to access, along with the Artifact of Command, which lets you choose your lunar items, which essentially makes it basically just a free to get rejuvenation rack. However, at the cost of being, well, all healing is applied over time, and that is a terrible drawback, especially in the late game where having more Corpse Blooms is actually going to be your doom. Instead of getting instant healing, it is applied over time, and getting more Corpse Blooms is actually bad for you. It's not actually the best. Next up would be Glowing Meteorite. Glowing Meteorite is one hell of a lunar item. It is a meme item. It's solely used for memes. It's nothing else. You can already know why it's pretty bad. Next would be the Purity. The Purity is an interesting item in and of itself. It reduces cooldowns by 2 entire seconds. Shaving off your cooldown by 2 entire seconds sounds already pretty good. However, the cost of being a reverse 57-leaf clover, in which it reduces your chance to actually, well, proc stuff, and that's already terrible, considering how it's already good on a few survivors, mainly Commando and Accurate, but you could argue Artificer as well, and Loader, but however, those survivors are already good enough and don't need a cooldown reduction like the Purity to actually be good, and Accurate and Commando have their own justifiable reasons for why the Purity is good. Next up would be the Defiant Gouge. Defiant Gouge, while it says it scales over time, actually scales extremely poorly. The combat enemies that you get from it with activating any shrine in the game is extremely useful for early game, as well as getting coins and early game loot. You basically have something else to do besides wander around for monsters if you're actually bored. Well, after that, we finally have the B tier. The B tier would be the Focus Convergence. Starting it off in the Focus Convergence. The Focus Convergence is a lunar item that benefits you most of the time more than it hurts you. The hurtful part, however, is if you're playing during Eclipse mode and on multiplayer, for which this item will actually hurt you more than it helps you, because the drawback to it is reducing the teleporter radius by negative 50%. With that as happening as well, the Focus Convergence is only good in single player runs, for which its drawback will be mainly negated due to the fact you are alone, and if you're not in an Eclipse run, the teleporter radius will not be even smaller. Next would be the Shaped Glass. Shaped Glass got a hard nerf in 1.0. Due to the fact it got removed one-shot protection, doubling your damage is no longer a free win, as you do not get one-shot protection anymore. That's really all I have to say on it. The Hellfire Tincture. Now, the Hellfire Tincture by itself is a okay item. It's an okay lunar. It hurts enemies more than it hurts you ever will. Now, we're not talking about synergies. Therefore, if we were talking about synergies, then Hellfire Tincture would be in, like, God tier. However, the Hellfire Tincture isn't in God tier because we're only rating the item individually. And since we're rating the item individually, it would only be B tier. The next would be Brittle Crown. Now, the reason Brittle Crown is in B tier is because of the early game and how much the early game sucks. The reason the early game sucks so much is because of the chip damage, and chip damage is a really hard part to get by in early game if you're using the Brittle Crown, to which you are the equivalent of using a crowdfunder, and you're always losing cash and never being able to buy something, to which you will lose 100% of the gold that you take on hit. You gain gold on hit, but lose it on hit. Next would be Visions of Heresy. Visions of Heresy would be more useless than it is useful. It replaces your primary with Hungering Gaze, a Lunar, which is good on certain survivors, mainly Engineer and Acrid, because both of their melees are just hot garbage compared to the rest of the survivors in general. But Hungering Gaze just gets worse the more stacks you go after too, because it increases the cooldown by 2 seconds. Well, yeah, you can already see how that goes out. Strides of Heresy has the same problem as well, the next Lunar we're going into, only it's better on more tanky survivors such as Multi or Rex. However, these have their own problems as well, because it replaces their utility skill, which is a most valuable skill to many survivors, so it wouldn't be as useful. However, I am rating it higher than the Visions of Heresy due to the invincibility and the healing it gives you, as well as the clutch moments that the healing will give you. Spinal Tonic is next, and as I said before, we are not rating item synergies. Item synergies are in no way rated at all, in any way, shape, or form. This means the Spinal Tonic is actually a B tier and higher than most of the other items due to the strength it provides, but the downside of it is the reason why it cannot go straight up into God tier, due to the fact that you basically get all stat reduction with a 20% chance of when the Spinal Tonic wears down, and if you do not have permanent uptime, it is an extremely risky Lunar to use, and the upside is not worth it at all. Effigy of Grief is the final B tier item, and it's a really good Lunar item. It's gonna hurt you less than it actually helps you. It's a really good Lunar, actually, surprisingly, for what it does. They fixed it. You don't have to go back and grab it. You can place up to 5. With a Jester of the Drowned, it still works, because Jester's just God. It's just the best Lunar. There's no debate. And how good the Effigy of Grief is already is funny. Well, it was okay. I would consider it okay, but now it moved up a bit due to how it functions now. And finally, A tier, the Mercurial Rakist. Do I even have to say anything? It's literally just a better war banner. However, its drawback is both monsters and you can get affected by it, but the downside of that doesn't seem to really contradict its powerful upside. I've tested with this item a few times. My Lunar coins are kind of gone because of my testing, but it doesn't seem to hurt you more than it helps. Next would be Transcendence, the second to last item. That is really good. Transcendence is... it's a run breaker. It destroys Eclipse entirely. If you get it early game, you will die due to chip damage and all that jazz, but you know, you're fine. But Transcendence is just actually good. It negates fall damage to only 1, and Infusion still works with it, but even if we're not rating items synergies, it is still an A tier item due to the fact that it just makes Eclipse a general joke and how good the item is in general. Its drawback is that your entire HP is just shield, which should be self-explanatory. It takes 9 seconds to fully regen your HP because it's 7 seconds until you actually regen, then it takes 2 seconds to fully regen. Last would be Jester of the Drowned. Jester of the Drowned is just a Lunar that cannot be competed with. It automatically activates equipment at negative 50%. Your Pragon Accumulator goes to a 2-minute cooldown. Boom, it's cut in half from 2 minutes to less than 1 minute. That's an extremely powerful Lunar. It has no drawback, and it's even being considered to be reworked due to how powerful it is. Thanks for watching, I guess.